What's going on, guys? Carmine here, and a few days ago, George Martin did an interview with The Guardian, and in it, George said that he'd been struggling with The Winds of Winter. Now, normally I don't really discuss book updates for Thrones, but I thought this interview was really interesting and a good topic of discussion. Fair warning, I'm trying to do a new one-man podcast format with this video, so keep that in mind, but yeah, let's get into the article for a bit, and I'll give my thoughts on it afterwards. So in here, he says he's been, and I quote, struggling with it for a few years. The Winds of Winter is not so much a novel as a dozen novels, each with different protagonists, each having different casts of supporting players, antagonists, allies, and lovers around them, and all of these weaving together against the march of time in an extremely complex fashion. Now, I find this interesting that he's been struggling with it because I do have my own thoughts on why this might be, but I also want to talk about another theory that has been brought up in just a minute. But George goes on to say, and I quote, "The Winds of Winter is next, then I'll decide what comes after that, whether it's to go on to A Dream of Spring, the last one, or whether I switch back into Fire and Blood 2, do another Dunk and Egg story or two, but I'll worry about that one thing at a time. That's too far ahead." End quote. So, if you're not aware, we are getting a Targaryen history book that's coming out later this month, and apparently George will be focusing on finishing The Winds of Winter after that comes out. Now, the reason I think it's been taking so long is because I do believe that HBO has some sort of backroom deal with George to hold off on it until the show is finished, and that he could, take his time off while being paid, of course, by HBO, and write things in the Thrones universe outside of the main series of books. Another theory brought up by Preston on the most recent episodes of our Thrones podcast that we did is that he believes George is going back into the Winds of Winter and changing certain things to make it much different than what we saw in, we'll see in the final seasons of the show beyond season 4. And I will say that it does make a lot of sense, and I would actually like that to be true. We don't know what George told Dave and Dan about the endgame, and what we do know is that the clear outline was laid out for them, but not the details on how to arrive there, because even George himself hadn't come up with it at that time yet. It's possible that George is going back and revising his plans to make things different from the show to make this new, fresh, and exciting, and I do hope that is the case. But the one thing that he did say that did annoy me just a little bit is the tidbit about releasing Winds of Winter and maybe going off to do another story instead of Dream of Spring, which is supposed to be the final book. I'm split on this because while I do love side stories and histories from this world, trust me, at the same time, I do want that ending. And a lot of people have been asking me if I plan on picking up Fire and Blood or if I'm annoyed that we're just getting this instead of Winds and skipping it. And once again, I'm a bit split. House Targaryen is not my favorite house, but I do appreciate more history and clarity on a lot of these characters and backstories. Though I would appreciate Winds of Winter, I'm just happy we're getting more content from the man himself. Do I plan on picking up a copy? I might at a later time. You guys ripped me apart in one of my last videos for not reading Wheel of Time or Kingkiller Chronicles, but it's mainly because I'm so busy. If there's an audiobook for this, then I'll be sure to get it. But on the topic of the Wheel of Time, I may not be too familiar with the story, but I am familiar with its publication history and how the author died around the end point of the story and how someone else had to come in and finish it up. Naturally, it's very rude to discuss another person's health, and I don't want to be that guy. But that being said, I do think that for as much content as we're getting, Winds of Winter and Dream should be #1 priority with an emphasis on other histories after the story is finished. Personally, I would love if we got a big history book for each of the houses. Fire and Blood for House Targaryen fans, Hear Me Roar for Lannister fans, and Winter is Coming for Stark fans, and so on and so forth. But if something did happen and George could not finish, I feel like his wife and assistants might release cliff notes on how Dream of Spring would have gone and ended. Obviously wouldn't have gotten the full book, but that's what I believe would happen if that were to happen. Others in the Thrones community believe that Elio and Linda, who are one of the biggest superfans in the community and even co-wrote a book with George, might come in and help piece the last book together, or even maybe release their own series of stories set in the universe. But we'll just have to see if it happens. Hopefully it doesn't, though. But in summation, I'm completely fine with Fire and Blood coming out instead of Winds of Winter. As a history buff, I welcome any piece of Thrones content from the God King Martin himself, but if I had to choose, obviously, I'd want Winds of Winter. Hopefully nothing bad happens to the guy, God friggin' forbid, but I am interested in seeing, if true, how Winds differs from the second half of the show. Maybe Stannis survives until the last page. Maybe Roose Bolton gets to keep the North and Jon stays dead. Who knows? I would actually like something like that to stray away from the show and just do its own thing, but ultimately it's whatever. I'm just happy we're getting anything at all. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.